All right, so I'm understanding, and I kind of expected this. I knew that this is the fight of the century, and you guys are the Rocky Balboa, right? So maybe some of you are up against the ropes right now. Redux is it looks like the Redux may actually beat you, but it's not going to happen. And what we're going to do today, I'm actually having to. I'm gonna actually go over the last class a little bit. I'm going to do that really quickly at first because people are struggling a little bit with that. Some are. That means I'm going to cut out part of the lecture I had planned for today. And that part, and I think it's the right part to cut out, but it's a part that deals with um, setting up the Redux dev tools to be used inside your Redux environment, inside your web environment. And we didn't really talk about that last time. I'm just going to suggest if that's something you want to go over, talk to your team leads or go over, find in the video that Dustin did last on the webpage inside the training kit. Just go over that one for Dustin Myers, and he has that set up there. I'm not going to cover that today because instead, let me go ahead and share. Instead, what we are going to do is we're going to start, and here, let me put this out there right now. Start a thread for us. Thread for Async Redux. And that's the Slido. Okay. So if you have questions, go ahead and put it in there and we will get to them. But right now, let us just start with the project that we ended with last time. Today's project, I'm going to actually build on this anyway for our middleware. And so I'm going to come back to this, so that's fine. But let me just go over first what we went over last time. All right. So I'm just going to quickly go over the flow so we understand the flow of Redux. So the first thing we do in our application here for index.js, for Redux, we're importing two things. We're importing the creation of a store, and then we're also importing a provider that is specific to React. Remember, Redux is not specific to React. It can be used in any JavaScript project or even other languages if you figure out how to hook it in. But we need these two things brought in. We also need to have our reducers, and it's the same reducer with a minor change that we had from use reducers from that hook. And the different concept behind Redux is it's not just some sort of, it is a broader concept of store rather than just application state, right? And that's the language you want to use and it's what you want to look like. And then our store, the first thing we do inside our application, Next.js, we create a store and we hook it up to our reducer. So let's take a look at our reducers. Here we go. And this reducers, we're doing a combination of these two reducers so that our reducer, which you can look at it as a state, right? It kind of manages our application state. It certainly defaults to what our application state should be. So we have friends and title. Our index is basically just combining both of those reducers and making them available to our state, with this key here. So we have the friends reducers being available by the friends reducer, title reducers being available by title reducer. Remember, this syntax right here is equivalent to this syntax up here. It's taking the name of this variable and making it a key, and the value of that variable and making it the value, right? So that's what we're doing with the reducers. We're basically saying over here in our index that our store is this. Look at whatever's in reducers as your application state. And then down here, we then say we have the provider that was brought in from React Redux, and we wrap our entire application inside that provider and pass it the store that we've created. So what we're saying is anytime we're dealing with Redux, underneath this provider, right? So in this provider, in this application hierarchy, anywhere underneath that, when we're dealing with Redux, this is the store, these reducers is the store we're going to deal with, okay? And so that provider then, if we go down and look at our actual components that are going to hook up to the Redux store, and Dragon List, in order to hook that up, we have to import connect from React Redux. And then we have to just connect this component to that store. It already knows that the store is related to these reducers because we brought it in, because this Dragon List is rendered below our provider that we specified the store here. So we're going to connect that to the Redux store. That connection happens here. And I thought I'd broken this out before. Maybe, well, I'll break it out again to make this a lot clearer. Because I think some people are still having a problem with this higher order component. Right. So I'm going to break this out once again, like I did last time. And I'm going to basically say, because what is happening in the higher order component, our connect is a method that needs some configuration on the first call. And those configurations are the map state, the props, and this. And then on the second call, that's what connects. This connected higher order component, that's connected to the React store, is basically wrapping itself around this Dragon List component, which is our application specific component. And so let me break this out to make the, hopefully this makes it a little clearer. This is going to be a higher order component function from Redux. And then all that does is we're going to call connect. So we're going to basically take this right here, and we're calling that. So we call this function with these parameters, and it returns back another function. And our connected Dragon List, we're going to get that from calling this function that gets called back, which is our higher order component function from Redux. And we're calling into that our Dragon List. Okay? So this connect creates an anonymous function that then is immediately called with this. So this right here is hidden inside this parameter. Here, let me do this. I'm going to comment that out and leave it there so you can see it. And then down here, the export default. We're going to export default our connected Dragon List. Of course, we have to capitalize that properly. So we're exporting our default connected Dragon List. And then that, when it gets imported, here is Dragon List. We're saying just whatever the default is here, whatever the exported default is here, bring it in as Dragon List so we can refer to it as Dragon List. Okay. So that is what is happening here. This right here is the equivalent of, and here, let me put those together so you can see that. This right here is the equivalent of this right here. Okay. And of course, to make it all completely clear, the first call to connect that creates our higher order component function, the first call to connect, needs to have parameters for that kind of connection. And the parameters it needs is, it needs to know what properties are we going to send into you when this state over here changes inside of our state store. So this is the property that this component will get. Of course, this is the property that this component will get. whenever the state changes inside of our store, whenever this state changes. And not only that, it's going to get the value of that state whenever it changes, okay? So that's what map state to props does for this first one. And the second one then says, we're also going to send as properties into this component these functions that you use to change your state. And these functions that you use to change the state, we're going to pass it in an action creator. And these action creators, we'll just look at the add member one. This is an add member action creator. And all that does is it takes a value. Remember, an action creator is a function that takes a value and then returns back an actual action. And an action is an object that has a type, and it also has an optional payload. In this case, since we're adding a new member, it will definitely have a payload, okay? And so that first call to connect says, this function we're going to use to connect all of these things for the Redux store. We're going to use to connect that to this component that we then want you to use inside of your React application. Okay, that's pretty much all I have time for that. If you have further questions, add them in there, and hopefully we'll get to them. But we do have a lot to cover outside of that today. Okay. Now, and like I say, this pattern is a higher order component pattern. Right down here, it's the higher order component. This is basically a higher order. This connect is a higher order component creator. It creates the higher order component, which is, again, a function that takes a component, does something to it, and creates a new component. Right? So this higher order component is a function that takes a component and returns the second component that it's done something to. Okay. All right. Now let's hit finite machines. Finite state machines. State machines. You've got to call that first. Let's go over the material. First, we're going to describe the finite state machine pattern and its relationship to building Redux applications. We're then going to implement middleware, Redux middleware, into a Redux store. We're going to use the apply middleware. And we're going to effectively use the Redux thunk to asynchronous create action creators. So the project, I'm going to actually enhance this project at first. We're going to actually add a logic or a logging middleware here to show you how middleware works and what it's about. And then afterwards, we're going to do another start from scratch. And I'm basically going to build a project that is the kind of project that you need to build for your project on this module. And I'm going to ask you not to use the same API that we're going to use, but we're going to go over that, right? But first, let's talk about finite state machines. Finite state machines are basically a fairly abstract concept inside software. It's actually a mathematical concept, and you'll see that as you're learning software. There's a lot of mathematical concepts that then get brought, stripped of its math and get brought into the concepts of developing software. So you don't need to know that this the math behind this concept. The important thing to know is that a finite state machine says you have a system that is in a single existing state. It can only be in one state, and that state is composed of several other states. And when you make a change to another component, another state inside of there, then your system needs to be aware of that change so it can then do what it's going to do. And that change of that state will actually cause you to transition into a different state, right? So this, in this case, as it states here, so a state machine is an initial state, has a store, it has then a current state, and then it has inputs or actions that trigger transitions to the next state. So if you look at it in the training kit today, if you look at it here, it says that this is a door. This is a state for a door. And we can have a locked door that's closed, and then we can take an action to unlock it, and it transitions to a new state of a unlocked closed door. We can also have an unlocked closed door that we can then lock, and it transitions back to a locked close, which we see up here in this state. In this door, we also can have an unlocked closed door. So, and we saw that here, when you unlock it, you can do this. And then in this state, you can then, in both of these states, you can then either lock it and it transitions to the lock state, or you can open it, and now you have an unlocked open door. Then you can also have an unlocked open door, and you can then close it, and it transitions back to the locked closed. Unlocked open. Okay, that's actually a mistake. It should be unlocked closed, because closing it does not automatically lock it. Right, so this is a mistake right here. It should transition back to an unlocked closed. And I'm going to make a note that I read that fixed here in the training kit. Unlocked open state, also, you can close it, it goes back to unlocked closed. But you can also, when it's unlocked and open, you can actually lock it, and now it's a locked open state. And then lastly, with a locked open state, you can unlock it. We're assuming that it's like a bolt lock. You can't actually close it, right? It just won't let you close it, right? So, and this is sort of the logical state. Now you can think about it. Look at all this activity, all these different states that you're thinking about that are related to simply a door that can be open and closed, locked and unlocked. It has a lot of different states it can transition to, and you want to recognize that every time you make a minor change, a minor action to it, it is transitioning it to a completely different state. That you can only have a locked closed door, an unlocked closed door, an unlocked open door, a locked closed door, unlocked closed door, unlocked open door, and a locked open door. There's only 4 states total, but depending on the state, it affects what actions you can take on it. Okay, so that's what's important, and that higher level concept is exactly what we're doing with our reducers and our actions. Our reducers are the state, and that's what's telling us what sort of state it can be in. And you can actually get a hint at what the state is for your application by looking at the initial state here. Right now, we can have, and this is, it's a little more complex, because the only thing that our friends reducer does here is it has one state, and that state is members. Now, what's inside of there can be different. We can add members, or we can delete members, or we can have a blank set of members, all that kind of stuff. So those are different kinds of states. Over here, the title reducer is a little easier for us because we only have one title. It can be blank, it can be whatever, but we can take these kind of actions on our application state, okay? And you can get a hint, or when you're building something out, this is the first thing you want to do for your state. You want to go, what state can this system be in, okay? And that's how you know to define your state. This article here is what I have over here. And this is, initially, this is a broader concept. This is a guy who actually wrote a module for JavaScript state handling, right? So it's kind of like an enhancement to React to some way. Don't worry about any of that kind of stuff. Instead, I want to come down here and I want to look at this. This right here is a little more visual form of what we had here, right? And this is applying this kind of state logic on an abstract concept to something more concrete for your form. So let's think about your login form. If you have a login form, your login form can, so let's say you start out with your web page showing a login form. And that login form, somebody can fill in the form and submit, right? So the filling in the form and submit. Filling in the form doesn't change application level state until you submit it. And then once they submitted the login form, we want to transition to loading. We're assuming that logging in is going to take a little bit of time to actually query some sort of service that we want to show that it's actually loading before we transition to a different state. Now, as we're loading here, we have 2 different actions we can take. We can either have a success action or a failure action. And in the loading state, so we go from a login form to a loading state, we can either have a successful loading, which we want to transition to profile, or we can have a failed loading or failed login, or it may even be a failed loading. Maybe it's just a failed loading, but in this case, it's a failed login. If we have a failed login, we want to transition to an error state. So then we can go from the profile state to then, from there, we have two different places we can go. We can either go from the profile state back to the profile. If we wanted to do that, we could do that. Or from the profile state, we can go to a log out. And once we log out from the profile state, we're back here into our login form, which only allows us to submit so we can load back in. And then finally, this error state up here that goes from a failed login, we want to go to error state. We can try to log back in again, and then that's going to transition us back. We try to log in again, so that would be like a form of a submit. Once we do that, we come back up to loading, and then it goes all the way through. So all state transitions are represented here. All actions that can be taken on this simple login form can be represented here. And this is the application level state that we want to transition to these things. And that is what we are going to be dealing with today. And so now let's just set that aside. That concept of a finite state machine, where you have not an infinite number of states you can be in, but there's only so many number of states and so many different types of transitions you can make to that state. That's a finite state machine. That is what is informing us about what Redux is doing. For that matter, I would even argue that even React itself, with its focus on state, is recognizing or paying homage to this. It's just doing it by focusing more on the state than on the actions. Redux, and for that matter, the use reducer concept, is now taking all of this concept into play. And so let's come back to the training kit here. And let's look at, so here we're going to learn to implement. So this is how it applies, right? The reason we were talking just now about a finite state machine pattern and why I just spent this very precious time to go over it with you. The reason that we did that is because we're using this pattern. It helps to understand this pattern of Redux. Now let's go through Redux. I started out the session going through Redux, but let's go through it again here. We're using this visualization right here, okay? And the reason is because we need to actually hook into what Redux is doing. And I'm going to, so the concept of middle, we're going to hook into what Redux is doing by focusing on by that hook, and this is it's different than React hooks, than the hooks that we're talking about that's part of React, although it's a similar concept, because React hook says, hey, when you do this, when this happens, then React do something to this and hand it back to me. But the hook that we're going to do into Redux middleware, and that's a colloquial hook, not a technical hook, or into the Redux stores, we're using the middleware to do that. Now, middleware is also a broader concept. You'll actually learn more about middleware when you get into the backend coding too, because the systems that you're using for backend have their own mechanisms for middleware. But all that means is we have a system that does something important, and we need to have some sort of API for us to plug something in the middle of that system. And that is what we're doing with the Redux middleware. We're saying we're going to do something, we're going to have something that we want, some functionality that is important. And there's an API, there's a way that they've defined for this system that you can plug into it. For Redux, Redux is dealing with store and dealing with actions and reducers on that store. And then we can add our middleware into that Redux flow, however that Redux works. We just plug it into there, and whatever that middleware is, and that middleware can be, I'll just tell you about two of them. So there's two of them. There's two of them. There's actually any number. There's a large number of them. People are writing several different pieces of middleware for Redux. The two we're going to deal with today is a logging middleware, one that will log out what Redux is doing underneath the hood for us. So we can actually take a look at that. can be very useful. And then the other one is we need, for some of the stuff that we do, we need to have access to the dispatch of what Redux has been hiding from us. So Redux is hiding its dispatch. And if you remember, that dispatch is after after it resolves what sort of action through the action creator, what sort of action we need to send into the system. After it resolves the actual action, it then dispatches that action to every single reducer configured in the system. And those reducers will either not do anything with it and ignore it, or they will make a transition depending on what that action is, right? And the way that Redux is initially built, it's initially built without using middleware, without getting access to the dispatch, by assuming that every action and reducer only needs to that every action only needs to have one transition made to it. So action, we're going to pass it in, and for those actions though, we actually find out there are several actions that we want to do multiple state transitions. And in order for us to do that, we're going to need to manually dispatch those ourselves. In fact, I would argue that the way that Redux was built to hide the dispatch from us, the developer, the way it was built is over engineering. It's not that useful to have them do it that way. It would have been more useful for us to give us the dispatcher ourselves. And we saw that in the next stage of this development. By that is exactly what useReducer does for us. The hook, the useReducer hook. That just gives us back to the dispatcher, because it's assuming you're not going to be doing only simple things. So we're going to let you actually, you can certainly call it with a simple action, but if you have more complex actions, we're going to let you deal with that as well. Right? And so that's sort of the evolution. But right now, so the two middlewares we're going to do, we're going to first do a logging middleware, and then we're going to do a middleware that gives us access to the dispatcher so we can then dispatch as needed for our application. Okay. All right, so let's go over what the middleware does. This right here is the normal flow state. If you remember what I showed y'all last time, it was through the homepage of one of the videos, home screen of one of the videos. The concept of all of this is we want state to flow in one direction, right? We want state to flow in one direction. So whenever we do something on a component, it calls an action creator, and that is Redux is calling the action creator that we created, which then returns an action, which then Redux dispatches that action to every reducer that we configured in the system. And when I say every reducer, obviously that is happening here as part of the store, this reducer. So every single reducer that we have specified here in our combined reducers, it's going to pass off every action, even if it doesn't deal with it. It's going to pass off every reaction to those reducers. And then those reducers, if they don't update anything, then it's just going to come back to the component and we're good. It's going to bail out. If it does update something, it then modifies the state, and then React itself, which is a state engine, React itself recognizes it changes the state and then pushes that changes the state back out to each of the components. Okay, so a component calls an action creator, which returns an action, which the Redux system dispatches to all the reducers, which those reducers will return back a new state. I should actually say that every one of these is Redux. Right? These actions is happening as a Redux. Redux calls the action creator. The action creator, I guess in our case, it doesn't. This is us returning an action. But then Redux dispatches that to the reducer. The reducer then returns back a state, which Redux then updates the existing state, which then React itself will send those changes back to the component, right? So that's how a normal Redux system works. With middleware, when we add middleware into it, we trap right inside here. Well, our action The component calls an action creator, returns an action. That's the same. But when we have middleware, before it has a chance to dispatch to all reducers, they will send that action to every middleware that we have configured in the system. If we need middleware, it'll send that action to that. So the middleware can then do something with that. Whatever it wants to do, it can do something with that. And it could even enhance the action if it wanted to. Got to be careful with that kind of thing, but it can. Middleware can then do whatever it needs to do in the middle here. And then once it does that, it will then dispatch, it'll hand it back to the Redux, which then dispatches that action, the action that gets passed on. It then dispatches that to all the reducers in the system, and now we're back this way. So middleware here is what makes it so that we can tap into that. And what we're going to do here in this middleware with our logger is we're going to say, hey, this action is going to be passed into the middleware, our logger middleware, and then we're just going to be able to log out to the console what that action is. And then we can then push it on and go to the reducer. It's also important to note when you're dealing with this, that middleware is synchronous. This middleware, so it goes through here, it hits this middleware will be responsible to pass it off to the next middleware. And I'm going to show you how that works here in just a minute. Actually, I'm not going to show it to you. I'm just going to, but what's happening is the first middleware that we've defined then passes it to the next middleware, which then passes it to the next middleware. It doesn't do this in parallel. It does this in sequence. And then the last middleware passes it to back to Redux, which then passes that action change to all the reducers. So you saw this in the TK. I'm just gonna implement this right here, right? So you saw this. I think we got some time. So what we're gonna do first, we're going to add this middleware to, then this is a separate NPM package. Right, so we can come over here. And as we come over here, we can do Redux logger. So this is some special, we could actually build this ourselves. We're just going to use one that's already in there. It's a pretty simple, you can go look at the code on this. It's a pretty simple middleware. And this middleware now is available to us. So let's look over here. This part of Redux, there is something called apply middleware, right? So we come back to this where we are doing the create store and where we are pulling create store from Redux. We also want to create apply middleware. So that's, and the reason we need to do that is because there's a second parameter that you did not know about before you listened today or went over the training kit. We were just doing create store with the reducer. We didn't have any middleware, so we didn't pass it. But the second parameter has us do our middleware. Now this is blank middleware. It's not doing anything here. And the reason is because we have to pull in the Redux logger. So here we're going to import, and I don't really know the API here, so I'm going to pop over here and take a look. So it is logger. So obviously you understand that inside Redux logger, there's a default export that we're using here for our logger. So it's not, remember this right here means that these aren't the default, they're just exported, and we are just pulling them in without the parentheses, the curly parentheses around it. It just means we're just pulling in the default here. And so we're going to pull in logger from Redux logger. And then here, we have to pass in our middleware, okay? And then now, so that's all we have to do for this logger, because that's what this logger does. It'll be different with the next one. It really depends how you use the middleware, depends on the middleware itself. In this case, this middleware, all we have to do is set it up, and now it is going to console log out any calls into our Redux system. And so let us come over here. Let's take a look at that. Okay, and then here we're going to add a new member. And now you can see this right here. So this was our other login here. So we were logging this out ourselves. But this is part of the, you can see right here, it's coming from the Redux logger, right? And it's creating a log group, right? And if I think we went over that once before, but I'm going to well, actually I don't have time to look for this. Y'all, it's console group. Yeah, this is it, console group. So I haven't even read this yet, but it has a console group. It's this right here, console group. And then group console, that's it, this right here. This is the basic grouping. So that's to actually make your output a little prettier in your console. So let me come back over here. I'm going to put this inside here as a thread. Actually, I'll put it in here. We all seem to be okay with that being in here. All right, so you can tell that this is a console group because it is indenting each of those changes. If I come over here and make a change, I clicked on that, right, bestie, it indents that. So it's basically telling us that we did an action of add member, and it's getting that from this logger that we just hooked up, and it's telling us what the previous state was before we did the add member. Then it's telling us, it looks exactly, it's telling us what, from the action creator, what the action is returned from there. And then it's telling us what our next state is. Now it's interesting, at this point, the state has not been updated. It has not been updated yet. And so what is really cool about, and what is very useful, or I should say, at this point, at the middleware, the state has not been updated yet. And so we can capture that before it updates the state and do something, right? And so what we're doing here is it's showing us what the previous state is. It's giving us that information. So that, I mean, you can look like that as the existing state. It's the state that as we are right here, but then it's also showing us what it's going to transition into. So for this toggle besties, it's telling us that we have, you can see the changes happening right here. Everything else about this is going to be the same, but we toggled Josh. And it's saying that before you toggled Josh, it was false. And then here, as you then went on after the next state, this is what it's going to go, this is what it's going to be. You could actually make a change to this at this point if you wanted to. Although I wouldn't recommend doing that because it'll be very confusing. All right. I hope that is clear. It is actually about a minute away from a break. So I'll go ahead and hit questions up after the break, but let's just do a break. All right. And we'll see you all on the other side. And we are back. Okay, I should ask. I was not aware. I didn't listen to all 5 minutes of that. I thought it was all. I thought there were no words on the music that I just played. Was there anything offensive there to anybody? I hope not. I hope it didn't go to crazy places. Okay, you just never know what people are gonna put out there for normal consumption. All right. Oh, Colby's very offended. All right. Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. All right, so let's look at the question. One question, great. I hope that means that I'm being very clear with what I'm dealing with here. So the question is there a reason to use higher order component versus use dispatch and use selector hook? That's a really good question. These are actually hooks that are available through a newer version of Redux. So clearly somebody did their homework and kind of knows Redux a little bit more than perhaps even me. But these hooks, there's not really agreed. It really is a matter of preference, but it is important to be able to understand the connect mechanism because you will be running into that. I would expect that these the hooks that are actually created through Redux now, we're going to see more and more code. But I mean, the debate is still happening today. There's still a debate happening today about whether or not people should move towards hooks. And there are some diehards that just aren't doing it. And yet the ones who do it recognize that there's a big power there. So there's probably going to be some teams that just won't ever transition to hooks. And so you're going to need to actually know those class components, and you're going to need to know how to do things inside classes in sort of the old school way. So obviously, I guess technically, I say it is a matter of preference, but technically, we could not use those hooks because this is a class component. And you can only use hooks inside a function component. So there's a technical thing, but then the question is, well, why not just refactor this into a function component? And my answer for you, if you're on my team, is, yeah, you should do that. Take the time to do that. Make it happen. Okay. No more questions. That is good. I hope that means we're pretty clear on this. Okay. So now what I'm going to do, here's your project for tonight. And this is a really exciting project. This is the kind of thing, this is why I love software development for what you're going to do tonight. Because this right here, you spent time sort of learning your tools, right? I actually do believe, and this may be a little highfalutin, or as my dad would say, who's 85 years old. But I do believe software engineering is very much like an art. In fact, I struggled with that concept for a while because I thought, how much of an art can it be when it exists for to be useful first and foremost before creation? Clearly, it's creative, but it also is useful. And then I realized that's why we call it software architecture, because that's exactly what architecture is. It has form and function, and a good artist will meld both of those and will do it in a way that creates art. And so tonight you're going to be very this is like, so you learned your tools, you've learned your pencils, you've learned your paints, you've learned your color theory, you've learned all of that to stretch the analogy. And then tonight you're going to have a blank canvas. And that blank canvas is what's terrifying to most artists, because now you got to create something. And that's what you're going to do tonight. You are going to use your own API, going to make your own choice. You're going to pick an API and you're going to use Redux. You're going to build something that uses that API with Redux, and specifically with that second middleware that I was talking to you about, the one that allows us to get access to dispatch. And that middleware is called Thunk. And so right now, what I want you to do This is a list of some APIs. And I want y'all to go through this list of APIs. And I'm gonna give y'all, I'm just gonna give y'all about a minute. Just go through there, pick one that you think sounds interesting to you. Okay, public API, pick one that sounds interesting to you. And I want you to pick one because here's what I'm gonna do. Before I ask you to pick that, I'm going to build a project using an API that we select as a class. But I'm also going to tell you whatever we select as a class, you're not allowed to use that for your project. Okay, so if you have one that you want to sell, that you want to use for yourself, then don't put it out there. And I don't want you to type it out yet. In a few minutes, I'm going to have y'all, I'm going to do a 3, 2, 1, go. And the first 5 ones I see, we're going to do a vote on those 5 ones and figure out which of those we're going to use to build an application with. So pick your API. I'm going to give y'all another couple of seconds. Oh yeah, I'll drop a link. Apologies. So take a little bit of time there. Just scan through it. There's a bunch of different stuff here. PDF layer. There's an XKCD API that I saw in here earlier. There's a Kanye West API. There's Open Trivia. It'd be easier if you picked one that didn't require an API key, but we can deal with one that requires an API key. That's fine. You know, there's a Spotify one. Fortnite. Yeah, there's a Fortnite one. Okay. Everybody get their preferred API. I want you to type it out. Enter. Don't press enter. If you press enter before I tell you to press enter, then it's going to be discounted. But I want you all to type it out and get ready. When I say the word go, I want you to press enter. Okay. So I see several people are typing. I'm going to let y'all finish typing there. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go. All right. I said the first 5 we saw. That would be Census, Taco Fancy. Got another one for Taco Fancy. Open Food Facts. So 1, 2, 3. Shibe, I don't know, online, and Halo. 1, 2, is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. Okay. So now I'm going to do a poll. What API should we use? And then I'm going to do multiple choice. I guess we probably ought to make it anonymous. Nobody gets angry at anybody. All right, multiple choice. We're going to add choices. Actually, I'm going to write that down because it's way up there. What do we got here? We have, it was census.gov. And we had Taco Fancy. And we had Open Food Facts. And we had Shibe Online. Let me know if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Maybe Shibe and then Halo. All right. And so now let's come down here. We're going to add choices. And it will be census.gov, Halo, Open Food Facts, Shibe Online, and Taco Fancy. I don't want to bias that online. All right, Shibe Online. Yep. All right, there's that. Go ahead and vote. Boom. Oh, look at that. It's a race. Got Census and Halo out to an early start. Got some Taco Fancy going on. Halo's starting to outpace Census. We got a couple of outliers there on Open Food Facts and Shabby Online. Man, we got a lot of Halo players in this group, I guess, huh? Yeah. All right. If you want to make a petition, go ahead and type in there. Make a petition for if you want to for your poll or for a reason why not to use it. Maybe everybody's going for Halo because they know they don't want to use that API for the project. All right. I'm gonna throw a Taco Fancy in there. I don't even know what it is, but I'm throwing my post in there for that. Oh, okay. That's what it's about. Jashila says, really want to do taco over herself. That makes sense. Okay. Well, there we go. It looks like it's kind of sort of a landslide. Halo. So let's take a look at that API then. Let's do a search here. Halo. It requires an API key. Well, I guess y'all need to know about that too. So let's take a look here. Halo public API beta. I hope that means it's going to work for us. Oh no, it's Microsoft. That's right. Yeah, that we may not be able to do this because, okay, it says instructions. To get your API key, just sign up, head to products, developer access, and then subscribe. Okay. Products, developer access, and then subscribe. And I guess I need to sign in with Microsoft. Oh, y'all gonna be able to hack me now because you know my Microsoft ID. Okay. Developer Halo, yes, yes, yes. All right. Okay. Your subscription, your applications. All right. I don't see the subscription here. All right. This is starting. I knew this was going to be complex. Microsoft never makes anything simple. So I hate to say this. You guys are going to have to do this yourself. I'm going to actually go with the next one. Make an executive decision here so we don't have to deal with the API. So what was the next one? It was census.gov. Let's do that. Yeah, Microsoft never makes anything easy. All right. Okay, good. We don't need the auth on that one. Yeah, this will be good for us. So again, really the auth is just an API key. And if I gave you all my API key now anyway, then y'all probably get me buried there. So, okay, available APIs. We got several of them. Let's do the annual survey of entrepreneurs and read more about this. Complete API call. Okay. Let's take a look at this. Not required. This is number of paid employees for pay period, including March 12th. Okay. So let's take a look at that. All right. So if you make this call with a .json, it returns back JSON that tells us our concept here, and then predicate type group. Okay. Well, that doesn't tell us how to call it though. Let's take a look. All right, let's try this, an example. Okay, so this NAICS, EMP, your key goes here. All right. total for all sectors. And this looks like geotitle imp pay an. This is kind of hard to actually understand what the data means. So I don't know why it's telling us we need a key. It said we didn't need a key. All right, so let's figuring out, and we're going to examples. Where did those go? All right. Examples. And we don't want something with an API key. All right, you know what? We're going to call it a failed experiment because I don't want to take more time to figure out this API. So that's actually a good lesson. You know, that you do want to get to understand the API and call it first before you start to go down. I think what I'm going to do. You've taught me something here. This is actually kind of new. This format, we used to do something very different that would make it very, very confusing for y'all. So I'm glad we're doing it this way. But let's see. Taco Fancy. Let's try this. Okay, that's not what we wanted. This is the main endpoint for the API. And what we want to do here, let's see if there's something that will do a random for us. All right. Even then, so I think next time I'm actually going to narrow the list down to ones that are going to be useful for us. So this is the taco randomizer. Okay, you know, this will be good. Let's just look at what we're actually getting back. It looks like we're getting back HTML, which I kind of want data back for us to do something with the data. I wonder if we can do that. Random, full taco equals true. Base layers. Okay. Let's do random full taco true. Let's try that one. There we go. So we got our API. This is going to return us back a random taco definition. It looks like it has a recipe, all that kind of stuff. All I'm going to do today, because we don't really have time for others. This is interesting. There's a URL here, so as a condiment list as a markdown file, which is pretty cool. So we're going to, right now, I'm just going to pull out, see the name of our taco, and let's see if we can do the recipe. Let's just start out with the name. Let's just do the name, okay? This is our API. Let's come over here. I'm going to do code sandbox. And we're going to create React sandbox. And right now, just so I don't lose it, I am going to put this right there. And that's how we get it. Okay. All right, you know, the first thing I'm going to do here, well, first, actually, I'm turning it over to y'all now. Base, and here, let me put this in the channel. This is our brand new Create React App application. Y'all can go ahead and go to that. But tell me now, here, I'm going to close these. I can get rid of some of these. Not that one. We're going to keep that one around. Got rid of this census, taco, public APIs, and we'll get rid of that. Okay. So tell me, where would you start? What's the first thing you want to do here for your application? I'll put this over here so we can see it. Need a store. That's a good first step. We also need the dependencies to be able to do a store. So I like creating the store. That's good. But let's do dependencies first, and then we'll do the store next. I like that. Okay. And so our dependencies are Redux. And then, of course, React Redux. And then we need to make an API call. It's just a web call, not secure, which is interesting, but a web call. And so we're going to need to use Axios. And so we know we're going to need that. And then we also need Thunk, which is going to be our middleware. Redux Thunk specifically. Need Redux Thunk. That's going to be our middleware. Remember, the Thunk is the name of the middleware that allows us to get access to the dispatch method that we can then use for dispatching. Okay. And honestly, I'm going to do this because we seem to have had, I would actually go and do the store here first, but I'm actually going to break it up a little bit because it seems that people tend to like it a little bit better if we don't have it all in one file. So we've seen some examples of us doing app.js. I don't know why. I mean, you'll see this most in the wild. I don't know why this Create React App on Code Sandbox does it this way. It should actually break it up into two, in my opinion. But I'm going to actually do this. And then down here, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to get rid of that. And then we can get rid of that. And then here we can export default app. Okay. And then over here, we're going to get rid of the app because we're going to be importing that in. And we do need to import it. Import app from app. Okay, and that's rendering over here. So now it's working fine. So that might be something good to do just to get practice with it. But you saw what I did was I just copied everything over here and then put it into here and then got rid of whatever we didn't need for hooking up for the rendering, the DOM renderer, and then only created an app application and moved the JSX over there. And here we don't have any JSX. We're just hooking up. We're just using the React DOM to hook up to the root. And of course, the root was defined here by index.html. Root right there. Okay. All right. So now the question is, where would you actually put your create store? And I'm going to tell you, it really doesn't matter so much. You could put it here and then wrap it inside this app as a provider inside this app, or you could put it here. This is how we did it last time, and I'm just going to go ahead and do it here like that, right? And so people said we wanted to do an import create store from, Redux, and then our create store is going to be here. We're going to do a const store equals create store. Oh, but what do we need there? What do we need for a create store? A reducer, that's right. We need a reducer there. And we don't have a reducer. So we probably ought to create one. So let's create a directory called reducers. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to create one reducer, okay? And that is going to be an index.js. And for that matter, this application, since it's going to be very simple, we don't really need anything more than that. But you can see over here, it's erroring out on create store. And the reason is because, actually, I think the reason that is because I did this when I should have done. No, that's right. I'm guessing it's because, we don't have the reducer in here. So once again, what does our reducer do? What do we need to do for our reducer? but don't actually type it in. Nobody type it in. I want everybody who's interested in mastering this material to first type it in, and then I'm going to tell you to press enter. And I want, even if it's a wrong answer, it'll be good for you. For us to build a reducer, what does the reducer need? Give us a definition of it, or just type in what you remember a reducer being. Just put it out there. And then I'm going to count down. In 3, 2, 1, press enter. Okay. We've got, we need a store, hold on, reducer. It needs initial state in action. That's true. We do need an action as part of it. It receives a state in action, mutate state accordingly. That's right. Zach's definitely right. Reducer needs to take an action and return something. That's true. Returns back as a state, an object that's a state. Aaron says it needs to be a state in action. We do need some initial state. We need that too. Adrian's absolutely right. Initial state and the reducer function. There's a function that takes state in action up here. Okay. That's great. Really good answers. Initial state, initial state, initial state, change state, switch case. Yeah. Although we don't actually need a switch case. We do if it's a useful reducer. But we're going to build it right now to be a non-useful reducer first. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to create the reducer. It is a function, as y'all said, that took in state, and it actually took in action. And then what we returned, we need to return back an object that is the representation of the state change based on this action. Right now, we're not really sure what we want to do there, and so we're not going to check the action. We're just going to return back the existing state so nothing really happens. And then y'all specifically talked about the initializer too. Remember, if we don't have an initializer here, it's going to fail over here. Although this is failing for a different reason. And so we're going to then create const initial state. And we're going to build this out in just a moment. And remember, this basically says that when Redux calls us at the very beginning, calls us with an undefined state and sort of an initialization action, then we need to, it'll be undefined, which will then assign it. This is a JavaScript construct, saying if this is undefined, then make this variable be this value. And then, of course, we have to export, and I'm going to make it the default of our reducer. Okay. And then over here, we're going to need to import reducer from reducers, and then in here, there we go. And now we don't have that error anymore. It's actually working just fine. We haven't connected that reducer yet. We've only just made a store. All right. So based on that, based on your understanding of what we did last time, we have a store now. Now, again, don't type in type in an answer. I want you to say, based on this, what do we need to do with that store? How are we going to handle it? Just type it in, and then I'll 3, 2, 1, and then we'll press enter. So type in your answer. And again, I'm asking everybody who wants to master this material, give us an answer here. Okay, several people are still typing. And again, it helps you, even if it's a wrong answer, it will help you solidify in your brain to type in a wrong answer and then be corrected. Okay. 3, 2, 1, press enter. All right. Initial state, we're going to change state, switch case, hold on, connect our components to the store. Connect our components to the store, kind of. Provider store, Carlos has it right. Connect comes later in the component. We're componentizing that. But we need to actually set the store to our application. So Micah, we're going to import a provider, and we're going to pass in store equals store. That's right. And import a provider, pass in store equals store, add prop to provider, store equals store, wrap the app in provider. Yep, all of those are right. Connect, Almost. Connect is going to happen later. That's the next step for the component that we're going to build for displaying well, any component that you want to connect to the Redux store. That's what we're going to use connect for. Yeah, absolutely. One thing is provider or map state to props. Yeah, map state to props is going to come with our connect later. All right, great answers, everyone. Now that's solidified. You guys are going to know how to do this better. And of course, where we get that from, we import our provider from our React Redux. And remember, as we said before, Redux, the reason these are separate is this Redux is an application. It's a library for any kind of JavaScript, but things that are specific to React are going to, and Redux are going to be in React Redux. And since this is a React component, obviously it's going to be inside React Redux. And then as you all said, we wrap it here. We then pass a parameter of store and pass our store in. And we're wrapping our existing app in that. Okay. So now it's absolutely correct that we have, this is a Redux application that has created a store. So our application now has access to the Redux store, has access to the Redux store based on this state. Interestingly enough, we don't have a state here yet. It's an empty state. So now at this point, we got this all hooked up. At this point, let's start thinking about our application. Let's start thinking about what we want our application to do. And let's say I'm the product designer, and I'm telling you all we really need here. First of all, I'm asking you, let's make this application specific. So you went in and we said, we don't want Hello Code Sandbox, we want Hello Tacos. And we don't really need that anymore. We're going to create a component here, right? We're going to create a component that is, we're just going to say simple taco right now. And all we want to do right now is display the taco name, okay? And so then, and this should be pretty easy for y'all at this point, because now it's just simple React that we're doing. We're going to import taco from, and I'm just pulling this out of my head, right? Because I know that we don't have it over there yet, but I know this is what I'm going to call it, and this is going to be taco. And then over here, I'm going to create a components directory. And then inside that components directory, I'm going to create a taco component. And then over here, we need to, again, this should be regular hand to y'all. Import standard stuff. And then we're going to const taco equals, we know it's going to be props because we know that Redux does things through props. And then all we're going to do here right now is we're going to return back an H2 that says taco info here. And then we need to, of course, export default taco. So it's a standard taco info here, standard taco component. All right, so then over here, we've got to import it. It's all working fine. Okay, so now let's think about that standard taco info. We know that we don't have this taco info in our application as I'm developing right now. We are going to get that taco info from a source, okay? And what we want to do is, what are some of the things, and I want you to type this out, I want you to think about what the state of our application is going to be, because we first initially come into a state of no taco info, and then we're going to somehow make a call. I'm going to initially do that at the outset. We're going to put a button in eventually. But we're going to make a call to grab taco information. As we make the call, right, we want to display that we're grabbing taco information. And then once we get the taco information back, we need to determine whether or not we got good information and update the taco information if so. If not, then we need to display an error for that. So based on all that, saying we want to do that, what sort of states should we have for this state machine about grabbing taco information? I don't want you to press enter yet. I want you to type it out. Okay, still typing. We're actually ready for a break now. But after we do this, we're gonna create our state there. Then we're gonna go on a break, and then we're gonna wrap this thing up afterwards. Again, remember the cognitive concept that Dustin taught us is even when you give a wrong answer, it helps you to understand it later. So everybody give an answer. And what I want is, what's our taco state? I'm putting this in here so I can see how far I need to go up. 3, 2, 1, press enter on your answer. All right. Sheila said something like initial state is taco with an empty array, error and is fetching. I like all of those. Data status error, a state for data. We are getting the API like taco data. Yep, taco data. We have an array here. Fetch taco success, fetch taco failures for actions. Yep, those are going to be our actions. I like those. We need to have a success, a failure, and a fetch. Successful and tacos, okay. Actually, those are all great answers. I like Jashila's, and please correct me if I'm saying your name wrong. I like this answer here because, okay, how do you say your name if you don't mind telling me? If you can pronounce it, if not, I'll just keep pronouncing it wrong and be embarrassed. Jashil? Jashel. Jashella. Jashel. Fantastic. Thanks for correcting me. Okay, so Jashel has this. We're going to do this. I'm going to make one change to this. So let's come over here. And there it is. And I'm going to, right now, I'm going to change this to this for taco info. Actually, we'll change that later. Right now, I'm just going to make this taco name. And then it's going to be just a string. And when we want to add more, we'll know how to refactor this to add more. Okay. So taco name. So taco name, error is fetching. Okay, I like those states. We're going to then build up our actions and our reducers and then add things into it. We're going to build this out and then add into it as we need to for our taco state when we get back from break. So let's reset that timer and I will see you all in 5 minutes. Okay, and we're back. Sorry, that music got pretty terrible there for a minute. I'm gonna have to screen music well ahead of time. Probably more important for me to go over the course material than to screen music, but I don't know. It's good. All right. Let's see if we got any questions. How do you personally differentiate between full stack developer versus software engineer? I don't really, honestly. I mean, you can be a software engineer and not be a full stack developer. So I guess I'm throwing that out there. Full stack developer is just somebody who touches. I'll say this. Here's how I actually tell the people that I'm interested in on my team. I want somebody who has a deep knowledge in one area. So we call it T-shaped individuals, deep in one area, and I would even say if they're willing and not afraid of searching the other areas, like the back end, the DevOps, the testing, any of that stuff, right? If they're not afraid of that, and they're intelligent, then we can use them, right? Deep and not afraid of doing these other things. People who, and you will find people who are only deep in one area, like deep in back end, and they happily don't ever do anything else. That's all they do. That's not a full stack developer. That's a back end developer. And they could still be a software engineer because they are engineering their back end systems. But for me, on my team, I want full stack developers because I want people who can, who even though that may not be the most efficient thing because they don't know how to build a Docker container as well, if they don't do it all the time, sometimes they're the right person to do it because they're the person we have and we have the need right now. And if they're not afraid to do it, people are smart enough, they'll figure it out and ask the right questions and bang their head on stuff long enough. And then also in doing so, will increase their own, their own human capital. So, okay, let's go. All right, we have a project here. We have 30 minutes left. I'm sure we can do that. All right, so now we have our state here. And one thing we don't have is our actions. So let's create an action. And our action file is going to be, again, a separate file, just one file for all of them, right? And so let's talk about those actions, because right now, we actually want to, we have our state, and I like our state. Our state is a good state. But now we want to do something to that state based on our actions. So let's talk about what those actions should be. And I think this might be the last time I do this tonight because we're going to have to speed up here to make sure we don't go over too much. But again, I want everybody to tell me give me some names of actions, and don't press enter yet, just type it in. What sort of actions based on our state here? Sorry, where is it? Based on the state in our reducers. In our reducer, we have a taco name, error. What sort of actions do we want to have here? All right. Okay, 3, 2, 1, enter. Update taco, fetch taco name, I like it. Success, failure, fetch success and fetch failure, I like those. Start, success and fail, I like those. Okay. Yep, those are all good. Fetch taco start, fetch taco success, I like those. Let's just start with those. Both of those I really like. Good answers, everyone. Okay. And so how we're going to do that, if you remember with our actions, we first, remember how we did I did this at the very last, some of you might not have been there for it, but we defined our actions this way. And we did it this way to make sure that as we're referencing our actions throughout, we don't have typos that are kind of hard to troubleshoot. We want to define our action names. Okay. And then down here, that obviously means that for our action, based on the action name, we need a Actually, we're going to need to export these, right? Export, 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 const, fetch. I'm going to say fetch random taco because that's very specific to what we're doing. Our API call is going to fetch a random taco. And since we're fetching a random taco, we don't need to pass any parameters into it. We just say, hey, call that API and tell us what that is, right? Tell us what that is. And then here, what we would normally do here is we would then just pass back. So this is our action creator, right? So we would normally pass back our action itself. So the type is fetch taco start. And of course, to fetch the taco start, we don't need, here I'm going to do that because it's only one taco. Fetch taco start. We actually don't need a payload here because that's just telling us to start the fetch of the taco. The problem is we want to actually fetch the taco and we want to have a taco success, but we only have one action to fetch that taco. And so this is the standard way. This right here is the standard way to actually fetch, so this is if we have simple state changes based on simple actions. This is a more complex action. We want to tell, because remember, how we are going to get that. And here, I'm gonna actually comment this out. How we actually are going to get that taco information is with an Axios get call, okay? So let's come up here and import Axios. Axios from Axios, right? So we can do an Axios get. If y'all remember, we did here then a then and the result. And here I'm just going to do a console log result. And then we also had a catch in case there was an error. And then here we're going to console error. Okay, this is how we're going to get the taco. But you can see we kind of want to do a fetch taco start first. And then after we have received a taco or after we've gotten an error, we want to do create a different action and pass it back. Okay. So that's what we want to do. The problem is the standard Redux system does not allow us to do it that way. And so in order to do that, we are going to need to use our thunk. Okay. And let's look here. Go to the training kit. You can see that, just look down. This right here means this thunk has access to a dispatch, right? So what that does, what thunk does here, when we add thunk as a middleware, and so let's first do that. We come over here, we're going to import, I think that's right. We'll find out in a minute. We import thunk from Redux thunk. And then we also need to import, like we did earlier, our apply middleware. Remember before we were importing our Redux logger, and then we just applied it to our create store with an apply middleware. And so here we're going to now apply middleware, and we're going to pass in thunk. And that is erroring. There's a good reason why it's erroring. It is erroring out here because, again, this thunk is expecting this to be a default export. All right, there it is. So now we have thunk middleware. So to make it clear again, we'll come back over here. We now have this. Our thunk now is being passed in an action. And it can do something with that action and then pass that on to the reducers, right? That's what it's doing. And what we want to do, so our thunk has an action, it can do something and then dispatch it through to the reducers. What we want to do is in this thunk is we want to grab the dispatch from Redux, which it is going to pass to us as part of the thunk. It's going to grab, it's going to pass us a dispatch, which we can then send any number of actions that we want to then be resolved by the system, okay? And so the way we do that now, and this is, again, now that we've added the thunk middleware here, it now has something special. Inside of our action, we have an action creator here, right? But with our thunk, let's look at the code here. With our thunk, this is a simple action creator that when we actually return, normally we return back, our action creator will return back a action itself. In this case, thunk says, hey, if it passes back a function, if that action creator passes back a function, I'm going to call that function with the dispatch, okay? So now that thunk middleware allows us to pass back a function instead of an action from our action creator. And that function then says, so we can do that here. And the way that we do that, of course, is we need to now return back a function that it's going to pass in a dispatch it's going to pass back a dispatch, and that dispatch is what we can use, just like we did with the use reducer. We can now dispatch any number of actions that we want to dispatch here, okay? And so the first one is we want to dispatch, it's a function itself. We're going to now dispatch this up here. Okay? Very similar to the use reducer. So we're going to dispatch a type of fetch taco start. And we don't have an action there. And I'm going to actually comment this out now so we can see this working. We know we're going to eventually get to Axios. So that, because what we want to do is we want to do another one when we have a fetch taco success and another dispatch when we have a fetch taco failure, right? Well, for right now, we're going to actually see if this is going to work for us, if we're going to actually get a fetch taco start. And what that means is when that action fetch taco start gets passed, it gets dispatched to our reducer. And again, that's happening up here. The fetch taco start, because of our middleware, is now dispatching a fetch taco start here to the reducer. That what we can do here in this reducer, we're going to need to do that switch statement that we talked about. And that's going to be based on the action type. And then our first case is going to be fetch taco start. And then we're going to return again, we get the state in here. So we're going to return the state with the change of is fetching being true. And of course, that is failing for us, not there, but it's failing for us because we need to import our action type name. So we're going to import fetch, or actually it needs to be this way, fetch taco start from, we are in the reducers here, so we want to go back one directory, hit our actions directory, and that's all we have there. And of course, this is erroring out on us because it's going to tell us we need to have a default state. And that default state is for us to return the existing state unchanged. And then we can get rid of that there. All right. So you see, this is part of the state machine concept. We're basically saying, hey, we have an action, and we actually want to transition to a different state for our whole machine. And a different state now is, when I say our machine, our virtual taco fetching machine, right? And so now we're going to then, in this state, we're going to then do an is fetching. Of course, it's not showing up over here because we haven't done anything with our taco. We're just showing this. So now this is where we need to connect the action and the reducers up to our taco. And if you remember, the way it does that is we use the connect method, and then doing the special things we do with the connect method, it's now going to pass both the action function, that would the actual action function that calls the action creator for us, and for us to make a change. And then it also passes in any kind of state change that we're interested in. So right now for this one, because we're not doing anything to actually affect change on that change, right now we're going to need to, we want to, when we initially load, we want it to fetch a taco for us. Okay, and of course, in order to do that, we want to do a, what do y'all think here? How do we do something when our component initially starts? I'm not going to wait here. I'm just going to let y'all type it out if y'all know. Use state, not quite, because our state is in there. It's the other one that we learned right after use state. What's the other hook that we had? Not use reducer. That was part of the reducer. Do you remember the one? Yeah, Micah's right. Karen's right. Yeah, good answers. Good answers. That's going to solidify in your head. It's use effect. Remember, the question is, what are we going to run when this initially starts and when there's other changes there? It's use effect. And so we want to import our use effect here so that we can then use it down here. And remember, this use effect takes a function that will get called, and then it takes a dependency array. All right. And so this is going to get called anytime there's a state change, anything. Actually, right now, since this is a dependency array, it's only going to get called once at the very beginning of our application. And so what we want to do here is we want to call our action. And the way we call our action in Redux is we call it off of the props. It is props, and then, well, what we had here was fetch random taco. We're going to do fetch random taco. Now, if we did that, it is going to fail, and I'm going to show you it's going to fail because we don't have a fetch random taco. So you can see it's erroring out on us here. We don't have a fetch random taco that's off of props. So it's actually failing, saying undefined is not a function, or is not a function that you're trying to call. And the reason is because we have not connected this yet. We're going to import connect from React Redux. And then down here, I'm going to do this. We're going to call this function that will create a higher order component for us. So we're going to call that. And this initial parameter is a map state to props function followed by an action map. And then when that returns the higher order component, we're going to then use that higher order component to call it and to connect our taco up. And then here, map state to props. That should be familiar from the last one. And then our map state to props is going to be map state to props, we're going to, this is a function that takes the state and it's going to be it's going to return back an object, a mapping of property on the key, fetch random taco with, so we want to pass in this with our existing state of fetch random taco. Sorry, that's going to be down here. The match state to props is, in this case, it's going to be a is loading is going to be mapped to is loading. All right, and so right now that's all we're going to need here. Map state to props. And then down here is where we have our fetch random taco mapped to a fetch random taco, which is our action here. We're exporting it for a reason so that we can import it here. Import fetch random taco from, we're in the components, actions. Okay. Right, see, there it is. So again, and this is what I went over at the very beginning. You asked, it's pretty much the same. We have now connected this taco component to the Redux system through the connect method by telling it whatever the map state to props are, whenever this property change or this state changes in our reducer through an action, whenever that state changes, this component wants to know about it by sending in a property of is loading. And then also, so that's the map state to props. And then also we need to pass in a function, a function or a method that we then call when we want to fetch another taco. And that is an action, we're passing that in an action creator. And then we're doing over here, it will call this and it will just dispatch the fetch taco start. And so what we're going to see here is as we start this, our fetch random taco is going to dispatch a fetch taco start. And so then we're going to be told here that it is loading, right? Because our action is fetch taco start. Our reducer fetch taco start says it is fetching. Okay, so I need to actually change that. That's wrong. It's is fetching. Is fetching. Yes, you're quite fetching. All right, so now that's going to actually, so we need to use that here inside our application. So now we're going to do a if props.isFetching. So if it is fetching, we're going to return a fetching taco data. And you can see over here, look what it's doing. Watch what it does over here. It's going to render taco info here first, and then based on this, it's then going to flash. Do you see that? Well, here, I'll save it. Here, I'll do that. See how it flashed? Yeah, see that? So that's because it's doing that, and then we're immediately fetching it. All right, which is great. We now are having that work. We now are inside of our action, which we have access to dispatch. We are telling it whenever it's doing a fetch random taco, first dispatch through the system, we are fetching a random taco now. And then now we can bring this back. And of course, we need to come over here and grab our taco randomizer. Okay. And so now you should see, and in fact, let's look at our console log. There's a network error. which is interesting. Let's just verify it's not a code sandbox thing by coming over here and look at the inspection and look at the console. It's giving us a network error. Okay, mixed content page, blah, 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 blah. This request has been blocked. The context must be served over HTTPS. I wonder if we can. Let's hope we can. Okay. Is that accurate? Yeah, okay. So that's good. That's a good error message. And it's actually a great error message for us here because it is getting to this spot right here. In fact, when you want to trigger this after you fork this code for me, when you want to trigger this, just trigger it that way. You can see now it's working just fine. And you can see it's working just fine because it's passed back our object. And now it's giving us all the information about that. The name, recipe, so forth, and so on. And of course, we want this to be a different state. We're gonna do that here. Yeah, let's do that now. So our taco, fetch random taco as we start. And then through the fetch random taco, this action creator, since we are passing back a function that receives a dispatch, since we're passing back a function that receives a dispatch, the thunk middleware knows I need to send them this dispatch. And so now here we have access to dispatch. We can then send this at first, and then on a success here, we're going to still console log this out. On a success, we need to then do another dispatch of our fetch taco success. And now what's interesting here, so let's do a dispatch. And the type is going to be fetch taco success, but we need the payload, right? We need the payload. And our payload is going to be our res.data. Res.data, and it's going to be .name. So we're logging out res, which is this object here. Inside of that, we have a .data, which we do with all Axios calls that have data, and then a .name for the traditional American taco. And so our payload here is going to be res.data.name. And of course, it's fetch taco success, not fetch tacos success. Okay, we have a problem. We'll deal with that in a minute. There is a problem. I'll explain that in a minute here. Okay, so now this is actually happening. We're dispatching this. Once we get back success, we are now dispatching a fetch taco success. So coming back over here, our middleware first sends a fetch taco start, and it goes through, but it just sits here as well. And then later on, after it receives this asynchronous callback, after it receives this, it sends another dispatch to the reducers, and that other dispatch is a fetch taco success, which then gets sent to all of our reducers. So when we send it over here to our reducers, well, it's not doing anything with fetch taco success. But we know we want to do with that. We already thought this out. Fetch taco success. And so then down here, we can do a case of fetch taco success. And here we are going to return, again, we start off returning the existing state. What are the state changes we want to have in a success? I know we're close to time here. I want you to just think about that for a minute. You don't want to answer yet. Or if you do, just go ahead and answer. What sort of changes do you want to have with success? Taco name, we want to change that. Yeah, Joshua, that's absolutely right. We want to change is fetching to false. So we want to update the taco name, and we also want to change is fetching to false. Anything else? And nobody's answering, so that's fine. Yeah, we also, if we have an error, well, we just had a success. we probably want to clear the error out if there is an error. Okay. And so we really want to make changes to all three of these. So we could actually avoid this, and we could do something like taco name is action.payload, and then error is no error, and is fetching is back to false. We could do that, and that would work perfectly fine because we are updating every single thing inside of here. That being said, you should always do this, because eventually somebody will come along, add something else to the state here, and then it will break in a way that they don't know. So always do this. There's no reason not to. And then add all this. Okay. So now we have a taco name. This is all working now. It's working just fine. It's updating the state. But of course, with it updating the state that's part of our Redux, we don't have access to that state here. We don't have access because our state here is only pulling fetching. What we want to do also is pull, let's call it the same name, the taco name. You need to make sure that gets passed in as a property. Now we know that this props is receiving this function, this variable for this is fetching, and then this taco name for this. Now, I want you to notice here, it's no longer saying fetching taco info. And the reason it's no longer saying fetching taco info, instead of saying taco info here, that's because our is fetching is being set inside our reducer by taco success to false. And so if we load that, you'll see it flash. You saw it flash 3 times. Taco info here, fetching taco, taco info here. Now we can argue about the usability of this. It's not that really UX friendly, but you get the point. You could actually make that UX friendly by having a completely different component here, a different area, maybe colored in red, maybe in a different area of the screen, so forth and so on. But now we have taco name available to us. And so that is available to us as a props. So let's just put this here for now. Props.taco name. Ah, you saw that. You saw what it did there. It flashed fetching taco. It flashed taco info here, flashing taco, and then back to Baja fish tacos. So let's make it happen again. Saw that again. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. And so every time we load, it is doing that. Now, there's one other thing I want to point out here. This application is good and it's done. I think it does mostly. One of the things that you only need to notice inside of your project calls for you to make sure you add some styling to this. This has no styling, so this would not work for you. Also, you can't use the Taco API. You're going to have to use something else. But I also want to point out, I'm going to add one button here. And there's a very good reason why I want to add a button. Yeah, I'm just going to do this. And I'm going to add a button here only if we're not fetching tacos, because I don't want them to actually keep fetching tacos on us by pressing the button. Okay. And so inside here, I guess I'll put it down here. We're going to do a button fetch taco. And then we obviously need that to be inside the identity, because it has to have a root level component. Okay, now we have a fetch taco. And then here we can do a onClick equals, and I'm just going to do a fetch taco. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to do a fetch random taco. A props dot fetch random taco. And that should work for us. Look at that. Because what this is doing, this is the event handler. So it's calling this method as if it were an event handler, which means when we come down here and look at this action creator, right? So it's calling the action. And as it's calling this, it's passing in an event here, but we're not using the event. So it's perfectly fine. We can do it this way because we don't need it. To do it a little more safer, I would say, to do it safer, you would want to do a const fetch taco equals event. And then here we want to do event prevent default. And then here we want to do a props dot fetch random taco. And then this down here will be a fetch taco. And then that should still work for us. All right, and then one last thing I want to point out here. I want to look at this error right here because you'll run into this, and this is important. This error is basically telling, it's not an error, it's a warning. It's basically telling you inside this effect, you are referencing this property. And yet, since you don't have that in the dependency array, it's not going to be updated if anybody changes this property. Now, in this function, we're not going to change this property, and it's fine. It's okay. But let's just assume that somebody can actually change this function for us for whatever reason. They're going to change the function for us. Let's assume that's the case. And so we want to put down here a props.fetch random taco. It's giving us another warning. Actually, there we go. Another warning. It'll give us a different warning now. And this is something that is kind of new to me, so I want to point this out. It says the use effect has a missing dependency props. Either include it or remove the dependency array. However, props will change when any prop changes. So basically what it's telling you is that we are going to fetch another random taco whenever any property changes. So when the taco name changes, it's going to fetch that. And it's going to fetch over and over and over and over again. And that's because we are referencing props in here. When, if we want to avoid that, we need to destructure this. We're going to destructure this to pull fetch random taco out of there. And then down here, we want to call fetch random taco. And here we want to call fetch random taco. But that also means we lost access to props here. And there are two ways you can deal with that. One is, first of all, we need to get rid of this, obviously, because fetch random taco. But our is fetching a taco name, we could either destructure that, or we can either destructure that, or we can do this, which is basically saying we want to pull fetch random taco out of here, and then we want to pass the rest of that as an object on through to props. And so we can then access it here as props. Fetching random taco, fetching taco information, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And so, but another thing we could do, and I'm going to make this clear by doing this again as well. We could also do a is fetching and taco name. This actually isn't a bad thing to do because this actually, when you look at this, it identifies very clearly, when you first look at this, what properties are required and used by this component. I really like this destructuring concept because it's sort of self-documentation. When you look at it, you go, okay, without having to read the rest of this, I know this taco is using a fetch random taco, and it's using an is fetching, and it's using the taco name. And I can make assumptions based on what it is. So, All right, and then we do this, boom, boom, boom. That is all working. I know we're over time. Let's answer some questions here. If you need to go, then feel free. If you'd like to listen to the answers, that's great as well. Okay. How are we getting dispatch into actions if Thunk is imported into our apps.js instead of our actions folder? Okay, Thunk is not actually imported into apps, meaning into here, yeah. Because what Thunk is doing as middleware, remember, all Thunk is doing as middleware is it is saying, it's setting up here, it is grabbing these actions and passing it through. Thunk itself, the code inside here, updates, it does other magic here to update the Redux system, to tell the Redux system. So right now, normally, if we pass back an action, if we pass back from our action creator, let's look at this. If we pass back an actual action from the action creator, then Thunk ignores it. This part of Thunk ignores that and just passes it on and says, oh yeah, I'm not interested in that. But this will get it. This will get it ahead of time. When we pass back a function, Thunk over here looks at it and says, oh, this is a function. I need to call it with the dispatcher method, which it has access to. It has access to the dispatcher method, so it says, oh, this is a function. I need to call it for the dispatcher method. And by the way, I need to stop propagating this out through the rest of the system. I need to make sure that this does not move on, because this is something only I know how to deal with, okay? And so Thunk is actually trapping that middleware. And yes, you're absolutely right. We are setting it up here, or sorry, inside of our index. We're setting it up here, but that's fine because the system is saying, hey, I need to then pass everything to that middleware, all actions to the middleware before I propagate it throughout the system. And it knows, so its hook into Thunk, is the fact that we are passing back a function instead of an action creator. This is how we are triggering Thunk here, by saying, hey, pass back a function. If you pass back a function without Thunk being triggered in there, it's going to error on you, because the Redux system is going to go, hey, your action needs to be a object with a type, right? It'll actually error on you and say you can't do that. But the only reason we can pass back a function now that gets a dispatch is because Thunk is allowing us to do that. I hope that was clear. Do you always have to map the function passed into the object of connect? Line 22 in Taco.js. So here, let me close this, line 22 in Taco.js. Line 22. Let me ask that question again. Do you always have to map the function passed into the, it may have changed by the time you put that in there. So whoever asked that, could you, line 28 now maybe? Is this what we're doing? Do you always have to map the function passed into the object of connect? Here, okay, so the answer is this. It's actually line 37, I think. So you're actually asking, do we always have to map a function? No, you don't. If you don't need, if the only thing this component is interested in is properties as they get changed, and you don't need to actually make any changes to the standard, to the React or to the Redux system or to the state system, if you don't need to make any changes to that, you never need to have anything here. So if we were never fetching a random taco and all we were doing was getting the state of the fetching or the taco name, right? So let's say we broke this out into a different component that was only interested in the taco name. Well, we wouldn't have to do this. But also, if that was the case, we could just prop drill it down, so it wouldn't be that big a deal. But yeah, there are some cases where you will see this blank only because you don't need to make, in this component, changes to the component state. And if that was not if I didn't answer your question and there was a different question there, then please reach out to your team leads and have them reach out to me if needed. What is a React fragment? A React fragment is is, I call it the identity. This right here is the React fragment. And it's basically because React requires you in your component to have a top level element, that then houses all the other elements. It used to be everybody would do this. Everybody would do that. Okay. And that was annoying because it was adding a div to the rendering. It was adding a div that really we're only using just to group this. If you don't really want a div here, you can use a fragment. And that's the way that it's defined. Or it's defined as React.fragment like this. Yeah, fragment. React.fragment. So it is a way for the React system, as it's rendering out, to know if there's a fragment here, let's not render anything. Let's just render what's underneath it. Okay. Yeah, you bet, Jennifer. Thanks. So that's what a React fragment is. It started out divs everywhere that we didn't need. Everybody said, that's annoying. Why do we have to have these divs? So then they created this fragment concept. So created a JSX element that is first this. They did it this way. And then they made it very clear by saying this does not have any kind of JSX identity, right? It is the no identity JSX element, which again, it's the same as all those other things. Okay. Is it fine to use an API with a key? Yes, it's fine to use an API with a key. The reason I didn't want to actually show you that, because if I actually had my own key, normally you would put it in a place that it would not be accessible to anybody reading your website. You have to be a little more secure with that. But for this application, all you would do, and normally what that means is most, depending on the key you're using, you would then just have over here some sort of an, let's see, API key equals, and then your key here. Now, I wonder if that actually breaks it. No, they're just ignoring that because they don't have it. But normally it'd be something like that. You don't really want to put the key inside your code base, although you can in this one. In a real application, you just don't want this to be in your code base out there. You want to pull into your code base as part of the build system or part of the deploy system for it to be able to access it. But for now, this is normally how it is. And it really depends. I say normally, it depends on what API you select. It'll tell you, and you have to learn that, how to use that API key. Sometimes they'll need it as part of a JSON object, or maybe it's part of a post message with data that you pass into it rather than a get message. So you're going to have to read that, whatever API you choose, and figure that out. All right. How many times within an app can we use connect? Can I say have 4 component sets, each requiring their own store? Can I connect 4? You could. Normally, you would have one store, and then every component that needs access to that store needs to be connected to it. So every component will need to have a connect, and you would connect it to that store based on this provider. So this component is inside this provider. So this is the store that you're connecting it to. If you want multiple stores, which you don't need to do for this assignment, but if you want multiple stores for your application, and sometimes it will be broken out that way, then you want to move that provider down deeper in the application, up above. You want to do this provider concept and down here, down deeper in your application, and then wrap whatever's in there inside that provider with a different store. You want to create a store there. You want to do all of that down there. You could do that. You don't need to do that for this case. In this case, I would say just keep the store, and then obviously your other components. Every component that you want to have access to that store needs to be connected to that store with the connect method. And finally, if I only need to access an action function using connect, do I still need to map state to props? No. No, if you don't need access to the properties of the state, and all you need to do is update that state, then your maps, you do need a function here, but your function will just return an empty thing. Okay, in fact, you could do that this way. Like that. You just put it in there. It may actually take a null and not do that. I don't know. But this would actually definitely do what you're asking for. You won't need a map state to props. Okay. I know we're a little over time, a bunch over time, but there was a lot to cover. And I know that at the beginning, they wanted me to cover the previous lesson as well. Thank you very much for your time, and good luck with this. And I know that this is the Rocky Balboa comeback. We're going to see this. You'll have a great night.